Tonight, raging forest fires force the evacuation of a maximum security prison. Inmates moved from the federal facility on Quebec's North Shore. While flames in Labrador keep hundreds out of their homes.
You can see the smoke towering up right over our town.
A shattered trust in Canada's sports landscape.
Don't pretend that we don't need a new law.
Calls for a public inquiry to help athletes suffering in silence.
The system is designed against the athlete.
And the digital tool providing medical resources to people in remote communities.
It allows the patient to do self-management.
Plus, the strength of star power.
The fact that he chose it on his own, that just makes me super happy.
An East Coast business gets a boost in sales thanks to Snoop.
I'm a gangster, but y'all knew that.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. A maximum security prison has been evacuated as a pair of out-of-control wildfires burned dangerously close to Port Cartier, Quebec. The community along the province's North Shore, just one of many in eastern Canada, faced with the threats of fierce flames, forcing hundreds to pick up and leave. CTV's Christina Tanalia starts us off.
Smoke is billowing over Quebec's Côte-Nord region in this photo taken today. And recent video shows the force of the fumes over the city of Port Cartier. A state of emergency remains in the city, located on Quebec's North Shore. Close to 1,000 residents were forced to leave their homes on Friday. And today, another move. Correctional Service Canada announced the evacuation of Quebec's Port Cartier institution. More than 200 inmates were sent to other prisons. The agency notified victims and their families. The prison is home to some of Canada's most dangerous criminals, most recently, serial killer Robert Pickton, who died after a jailhouse attack in May, and previously, Paul Bernardo. This emergency situation continues to evolve, says CSC. We will continue to communicate with our staff and to work with all of our partners, including the City of Port Cartier and public safety partners. This will include working on when it may be possible to reopen the institution. And during an update today, the Premier announced some financial relief, $1,500 for each evacuated household. Northeast in Labrador, residents of Churchill Falls are waiting to return home after wildfires there. Their province's Premier couldn't tell them when they'll be able to.
Unfortunately, we don't really have a rock-solid answer.
At an afternoon news conference, the Premier said about 100 residents remain safe, 300 kilometers away in the town of Happy Valley Goose Bay. Robert Daw is one of them. He fled his home on Wednesday.
Look in the rearview mirror and you can see the smoke where everyone is ready to go home.
There are 9 active wildfires in Newfoundland and Labrador. 2 of them are near Churchill Falls, with the one at Mount Hyde Lake listed as out of control. That fire has been burning since June the 13th. Premier Furey adds that fire suppression efforts continue today thanks to the help of Ontario and Saskatchewan. He adds that he's grateful for the support of the other provinces. Heather.
Christina, thank you. And in the U.S. tonight, more than 100 million people across 27 states are on alert for extremely high temperatures from coast to coast. In Washington, D.C., dangerous heat climbed to nearly 38 degrees today, with people desperately trying to stay cool. That temperature broke a daily record in Baltimore. Meanwhile, in Iowa, the governor issued a disaster declaration as the state grapples with catastrophic flooding. 21 counties are still underwater. As Calgary's water crisis continues, several new water stations have been placed around the city, but distribution got off to a rocky start today.
Frustrated here today because now we're waiting. We're waiting for the trucks to arrive.
Some people hoping to gather untreated river water for their gardens waited for more than an hour in the heat before the water arrived. Crews continue to work on that ruptured water main, with the city saying it's still on track for the repairs to be completed by July 5th. A vital resource for science education in Ontario is facing an abrupt closure. Hundreds rallied in Toronto today to call on the province to reverse course and save the Science Centre.
just looking at the exhibits, seeing what other people were able to make and bring to kids, really made me want to do something similar myself.
The Ford government shuttered the popular landmark Friday, citing an engineering report which outlined concerns about a potential roof collapse this winter. Protesters want repairs made and money invested in the current site. The closure follows the province's controversial plan announced last year to move the facility to Toronto's waterfront. More than 1,000 Bombardier aircraft assembly workers are now on strike after their union failed to reach an agreement with the company. The job action will affect Bombardier's manufacturing facility at Toronto's Pearson Airport. Unifor says negotiations are set to resume Monday morning. Voters in a Toronto neighborhood head to the polls tomorrow for a by-election that will be a critical test of the Trudeau government. The federal seat came open after longtime MP Carolyn Bennett stepped down last year. But cracks in the Liberal stronghold could lead to an opposition breakthrough. Here's CTV's Judy Trin on why this race could become a referendum on the Prime Minister.
A cauldron of discontent is brewing in the riding of Toronto-St. Paul's.
Like, a lot of taxes have gone up this year, right? And at a time that everyone's kind of struggling as well.
We have been one way for so long. So we are analyzing everything very, very carefully because we've been very disappointed with the government.
60% of constituents in this Ontario riding are renters. 11% are Jewish. Domestic issues are clashing with international crises.
It's probably going to come down to housing affordability, homelessness, and then also the hot button issue of what's happening in the Middle East between the State of Israel and Hamas.
For 31 years, voters have elected a Liberal. After former MP Carolyn Bennett resigned, Leslie Church is fighting to keep the riding red.
Hi, ma'am. How are you?
Not an easy task when many want a new direction.
Change doesn't mean throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Change doesn't mean abandoning your values. Change means let's do things better.
Hi. Support for Church's conservative rival is growing. Don Stewart did not respond to multiple requests from CTV for an interview.
Yeah, I love the message, Mr. Stewart.
Requests made over emails, phone calls, and in person.
Hey there, how are you?
NDP's Amrit Parhar's ground game involves appealing to disillusioned constituents who think voting Liberal is the only way to stop the Tories' momentum.
Is to respond with hope and not to react with fear. Not to fall into that, I'm going to go in and vote X way because I'm so scared of the Conservatives.
Complicating matters? This lengthy ballot with a record 84 registered candidates. Some don't even live in the riding. 76 of them are part of a protest movement.
My name is right there.
Like Glenn MacDonald, they're pushing for electoral reform.
In the last election, the Conservatives actually got about a couple 100,000 more votes than the Liberals, and yet the Liberals ended up with 41 more seats. How is that possible? How is that fair?
Possible ballot confusion, combined with opinion polls that show record low support for the Prime Minister, is putting Justin Trudeau's leadership at stake in a local by-election.
I think if the Liberals have a squeaker, or even if they lose the riding, then the leader of the party, in this particular case, Justin Trudeau, would be at risk.
Tomorrow, voters in Toronto St. Paul's will be heading to the polls. When they cast a ballot for a new MP, they will also be sending a message to the Prime Minister. Judy Trin, CTV News, Toronto.
NATO's Secretary General remains steadfast in the face of growing global turmoil and geopolitical risks. Still, some are raising questions about the future. Here's CTV's Jeremy Sharon.
NATO was founded 75 years ago.
When NATO leaders meet in Washington next month, they'll know there is unwavering confidence at the head of the table.
I don't see any imminent threat against any NATO ally, and that's because of NATO.
In an exclusive broadcast interview with CTV's Question Period with Vassy Kapelos, NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, in spite of expecting more from Canada in defense spending, reaffirmed his faith in the alliance's strength.
And the way NATO has prevented war for more than 75 years is to make it absolutely clear to any potential adversary that an attack on one ally will trigger a response from the whole alliance.
But this steadfast statement comes at a time of high turmoil and risk in the world. Wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine, fears of wider conflicts, and just last week, Canada's chief of the defense staff said this country isn't prepared to react to threats it sees coming.
The military that we have right now is not ready.
Despite the current climate, the U.S.'s ambassador to Canada says he agrees with Stoltenberg's assessment.
I think the NATO countries are in pretty good shape, and I think a big part of that is because of the strength and the power of NATO.
But some experts are raising concerns about the not-so-distant future.
The planners in Ottawa will tell you that they think they've got 3 years to make sure and be ready for a potential coming storm.
This former NATO commander believes the alliance only has a short window to bolster its capabilities.
What I think we need to pay attention to, yes, there's no imminent threat perhaps to the eastern flank of NATO, but China is on the horizon and we need to pay attention to the Asia-Pacific.
Which NATO has admitted to. Stoltenberg says more alignment with Indo-Pacific countries could be crucial to discourage offensives by nations like Russia, China, and Iran in the future, a topic on the agenda at next month's meetings. Heather?
Thanks, Jeremy. Ukrainian drones and missiles have killed 6 people and wounded 100 more in Russia and occupied Crimea. Among the dead are 2 children who were hit by falling debris. The attacks come after Russia struck Kharkiv yesterday with 4 bombs. Today, the aerial assault continued, killing at least 1 person and injuring 11 others. There are growing calls for a public inquiry to tackle a safe sport crisis in Canada. A deeper dive into governing bodies who some say have failed to protect victims of abuse. CTV's Colton Prale reports.
Canada's sporting landscape back under the microscope. A new parliamentary report says a public inquiry is needed to shed light on the reality of those suffering abuse in sport.
My experience is about abuse, trauma, maltreatment, collusion. My response is the same as all the other athletes, right? And what a lot of their legal experiences are.
Ottawa announced a federal commission on safe sport in December, but activists say it lacks the legal powers to make real change.
If you're not developing solutions and understanding the full scope of the problem, obviously the consequence is that the abuse continues, that the system doesn't change.
The new report also recommends legislation banning the use of non-disclosure agreements by national sporting organizations, like the one Hockey Canada signed with the woman who was allegedly sexually assaulted by members of the 2018 World Junior team.
Just take action.
Last year, this senator proposed a bill to do exactly that.
They're a fast and easy way to take something that's seen as a problem and tuck it away, shut the people up.
In a statement, the sport minister wouldn't commit to a public inquiry, but says the government has used funding agreements to prohibit the use of NDAs that would restrict the rights of athletes. Critics argue legislation is the only way to guarantee compliance. The ongoing federal commission ends next summer and consults with sporting bodies and survivors of abuse. A national summit will be held to review the initial findings and ways to improve Canadian sport. Heather.
CTV's Colton Prale in Ottawa. A promising prospect on the Toronto Blue Jays, or Elvis Martinez, has been suspended 80 games by Major League Baseball for a positive drug test. The ban comes just 2 days after making his league debut. CTV's Kamal Kramali explains.
When Blue Jays prospect or Elvis Martinez notched his first ever Major League hit Friday, he likely had no idea the league would come back with a hit of its own. Martinez receiving an 80-game suspension without pay after testing positive for clomiphene, a performance-enhancing drug.
This is the worst possible timing that we could have literally ever.
Martinez was a bright spot in a fizzling Jays season.
You had a 22-year-old that was basically one of the best power hitters in the minor leagues.
Toronto with a losing record, already a long shot to make the playoffs.
Now, having the one little ray of optimism we've had in the last week snuffed out in the midst of a losing streak, it might be the last straw for a lot of fans.
Swing and a fly ball. The Blue Jays in Cleveland today, where Toronto fans came out to show support.
I think the pulse, it's a little bit down
compared to how fans were going into the series on Friday.
Doping, a once toxic trait of the sport, has now dwindled over recent years after the league beefed up drug testing, with only one suspension all of last season.
They're trying to make this as black and white as possible. If you find, or if they find something in your system, you're suspended.
In his defense, Martinez says, "I've been trying to start a family with my girlfriend. This off-season at a fertility clinic in the Dominican Republic, we were prescribed a treatment. We trusted the doctor, who assured us this treatment did not include performance-enhancing drugs." The Blue Jays organization says it was surprised and disappointed by the suspension, and now it'll do whatever it can to make sure Elvis Martinez learns from his mistake. Kamel Karamali, CTV News, Toronto.
Coming up, cardiac care.
He wouldn't be here today.
The high-tech tool bridging gaps for remote communities. Plus, a major plot twist for a Fredericton man's passion project. A quick response for cardiac care can be the difference between life and death, a challenge for people living in remote communities. CTV's Donna Sound has more on a digital tool working to bridge those gaps.
He wouldn't be here today.
A grieving wife thanking the doctors who saved her husband, Daryl Hunter, from heart failure, which, if not properly cared for, could have led to a heart attack or death.
It was determined that I had a faulty mitral valve.
It's saving lives from a distance for those living in remote communities.
Individuals in the north do not receive the same quality of care.
Medley is a cardiac invention by doctors at Toronto's University Health Network, giving care immediately through an app on a patient's phone.
And they answer some very simple questions about how they're feeling. And as soon as they press send, it takes that long, and the instructions come right back to the patient.
Do you want to show me your values on the app?
To be part of the program, a patient will have to be diagnosed with heart failure or heart disease, or be at risk for having it. These people had no sustainable monitoring until now.
Based on the results of the echogram, I was admitted to the hospital, flown to Toronto, and then that led to heart surgery.
The hospital stays in touch with First Nation healthcare centers to keep it community-based. The Toronto team goes to Moosonee to monitor rural Indigenous patients a few times a year.
We were on the water taxi going over from Moosonee to Moose Factory, and a woman was on it, and she turned to me and said, "You're that doctor from Toronto, and I'm wondering if you'd see my dad."
All people who use Medley are monitored from here in Toronto, as prevention is key, and Medley, his family believes, saved Daryl's life.
It is quite possible Daryl would have died without intervention.
Some 2,000 people have used Medley, over 60 of those in Moosonee, keeping hearts beating one person at a time. Donna Sound, CTV News, Toronto.
Still ahead tonight. Fans pinning their hockey hopes on the Edmonton Oilers, ending Canada's Cup curse. The Edmonton Oilers are in Florida with a real shot at hockey history. The team attempting to bring the Stanley Cup back to Canada for the first time this century. An epic winner-take-all Game 7 awaits, and CTV's Paul Hollingsworth is in Sunrise, Florida to set the stage. Paul, the Oilers have made a remarkable comeback this series. The team is going to be talked about for some time.
Absolutely, Heather. You know, in sports, they throw around cliches and hyperbole from time to time. Not an overstatement probably to suggest that this Oilers team appears to be a team of destiny. Just 8 days ago, they were down 3-0 in the series. Many people tuned into Game 4 thinking they were going to possibly watch a Florida Panthers sweep and a Stanley Cup championship. Fast forward a little bit more than a week, and the Oilers have come back. They've tied the series. They have a chance to become the first team in NHL history since 1942 to win the Stanley Cup after trailing a series 3-0. It is epic, it is exciting, it is improbable, and it all boils down to a entertaining, we know it will be, Game 7 here in Sunrise, Florida on Monday night.
It certainly will be, Paul. And this comeback, though, has really led to some incredible fan excitement. It seems to almost be uniting people coast to coast.
It really has, Heather. And it's a really interesting observation. It's been percolating as the series goes along. There was some resistance by some people to suggest the Oilers were Canada's team early in the series. Not so much anymore. Reminiscent maybe of the Raptors and their playoff run in championship several years ago. The country is engaged. People are excited. I can tell you, on my flight coming down today, there were 6 or 7 Oilers t-shirts and jerseys on the flight. This is our 3rd trip to Florida. There have been several thousand people here watching the Oilers, and we're expecting the same for Game 7 as they try to win the Stanley Cup for the first time since 1990. Heather.
That game now less than 24 hours away. Thanks, Paul. After the break, from backstage to center stage, sales skyrocket after a celebrity surprise. From pipe fitter to global trendsetter, one man's passion project has received an unexpected boost after a legendary rapper slipped into one of his hoodies. CTV's Sarah Plowman has more.
Business has never been busier. A pipe fitter by trade, Matt Fletcher's side hustle is making clothes.
Drew the logo in the back of a car. We were in PEI at a snowboard competition.
That was nearly 2 decades ago. He'll order a few hundred shirts and sell them over months. And since teamed up with a longtime friend, they've been plotting how to grow.
We are certainly kind of at our startup stage.
A break came at another gig. Fletcher was working security backstage at a Snoop Dogg concert. He says he brought a hoodie and hat thinking maybe a friend could throw it on stage. He set the bag down and went to work near Snoop Dogg's dressing room.
A lady came to unlock the dressing room door to put in some fruit tray and some drinks and ice and some stuff. And she said, "What is that over there in that bag?" And I just said, "Somebody left a bag of gifts for Snoop."
The next morning, millions saw it. Snoop Dogg in one of Fletcher's hoodies.
And I was just blown away, flabbergasted, just overwhelmed, just wow. And since then, it's been just a whirlwind.
The post has helped push sales from Dubai to Bathurst. Sweatshirts are now on back order.
Messages, I want the Snoop hoodie. Could I get 2 of the Snoop hoodie? Could I get in this large? Could I get it in a XL, a double XL?
Another celebrity has since reached out to his business partner's family. Reggae star Kaimani Marley wants his own shirt.
And we are hoping to send that out probably next week. We've been given an address to send it to.
As for the future,
if we sell 1,000 hoodies in a week or if we sell 1, the fact that he chose it on his own, doesn't know where it came from and likes it and wore it for our brand, that just makes me super happy.
The power in star power. Sarah Plowman, CTV News, Fredericton.
That's our newscast for this Sunday night. I'm Heather Butts. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again on Friday. Good night.